Hello guys and welcome to this video. In this tutorial we'll be learning about statements and flow control. Right, so we'll just get straight into the point. So far we have been learning about statements and all of that. All the lines of code we have been writing are mostly statements. And so far we have our programs have been linear. Right, so every program that we have written so far is a linear program in the sense that it runs sequentially from line to line. So when we write a program of 10 lines, it first runs line 1, then to line 2, then to line 3. It does not run from line 1 to line 10, right? So all the programs we've written so far are linear programs and consist of statements. And statements always end with a semicolon, right? And now what we want to learn in this tutorial is a couple of tools that C++ provides us such that we can specify what conditions under what line of code should run and what happens at a particular level of the program, right? So we'll be examining those tools and the power they provide in this video and in future videos as well. So here we would be using compound statements as well. And a compound statement is simply a statement that is made up of other statements. For instance, over here we have a compound statement consisting of statement 1, statement 2, statement 3. And note that a statement ends with a semicolon over there, right? And a compound statement is enclosed in curly brackets over there, right? So all the constituent statements in a curly bracket, right? And we've already made mention that C++ does not really care about the indentation. So you can have a statement like this, a compound statement like this. So you can have them in separate lines with a curly brackets over there like that. It really doesn't matter, right? So I'll just do this for the sake of easy commenting out, right? So then we move on to the next section and selection statements, right? So we'll be talking about selection statements today, and these are what we call conditionals. You would hear most people calling them conditionals. They're what we call selection statements, and these are the if and else, right? So first of all, examine the if, what it does and what we can do with it. So the if is used to execute a block of code if and only if a particular condition is met, right? So you input a condition. So this is the format. So if, and then you input the condition here, and then followed by the statement, right? So what this literally does is if the condition is true, so if the condition you've specified here is true, then the statement or then the code block under the if condition will run. So the statement will run if this condition is true, right? So we'll look at an example and you get a better understanding from there. Now, so there's too much talking right now, so let's just use an example to illustrate what we're talking about. So simple code to check if a number is less than another, right? So this is a code we're going to write to check to see if a number is less than another number. And if so, we want to output the number onto the screen. So this is how to go about it. We first define our number to, we first define a variable to store our number, right? So let's just say int or double or float, whatever you want. And we want to call it a, and we want to equate it to, let's say 7, right? So we've created a number. Now what we want to do is to check if the number is true, is if the number is less than 10. And we've already learned some of those expressions like this, where we have, let's say a is less than or equal to, a is less than or equal to, let's say 8, whatever. We've done those ones and we've printed them out to see if they are true, right? So you can, okay, let's just run this to see if it's true before we move on to the aspect that we want to. It's always better we build on previous notions before new concepts, right? So I'll just go ahead and then run this to see what the outcome is going to be, right? So we shift B it, and that is my shortcut for build and run. 7 is less than or equal to 8, right? So true. So this is 1, meaning true. So this condition is true. So what we want to do right now is we want to say if and then condition. So let's copy this. So this is the condition. So let me just cut it and paste it here. Right. So if this condition is true, what we want to do is we want to put a statement, right? and this is a typical statement. So if the condition is true, then see out a is less than 8, right? So let's run this to see what is going to happen. So shift B, and we have here 7 is less than 8, right? So what this does is we have created a variable to store a number, and then we use the if statement to check if this number we have entered is less than 8. So this is the condition, and we have run this condition separately to see if it is true or not. So basically what the program does is this is the understanding. If this statement is true, in other words, if this condition is true, then output this message. So in a case that this condition is false, then this statement will not be output on the screen, right? So we'll go ahead and make it in a way that the statement will be false. So we'll put 67, and 67 is not less than or equal to 8. So this is false. And so in that case, this statement will not be output on the screen. So let's go ahead and run this to see the effect. And now we get process return 0, whatever, and all of that end message. So basically the program ran, but then there's no output message over here because the condition here is false. So this is the takeaway from this. If the condition is true, then the statement will run. If the condition is false, then the statement or the block of code under the if statement will not run. Good. So this was just a single line uh, statement. Let's do it in a way that it is a compound statement. And in that case, we have to use the curly bracket. So I'll copy this, I'll cut it rather, and then paste it over here. Right, so now we have one statement in our compound statement, and we can go ahead and add another one. Let's say that cout a is 8 minus a units less than 8. Right, so let's go ahead. Let's change this so that the condition will be true, because if the condition is not true, then this statement will not run. We want this statement to run too, so that we'll check something. So let's change this statement to true. So let's put in a 5 over here. So what this additional line of code does is it prints out a line which is a, which is 5. So 5 is 8 minus 5 is going to be 3. So 5 is 3 units less than 8. So that's what is basically going to output. So let's run this. Let's put the semicolon here. It's good I did not forget that. 5 is less than 8, and then 5 is 3 units less than 8. Right, so let's go ahead and put an end statement here so that we can get a real graphical representation. Not actually graphical, but a presentable format here. So 5 is less than 8, and 5 is 3 units less than 8. Right, let's go ahead and use a number like, we can use 1. So it would automatically subtract for us and give us the output. So we have 1 is 7 units less than 8, right? So that's basically using the if to check statement. So over here, what we did was to check if a condition is true, right? So if when the condition was false, in this case, what the condition was false because 9 is not less or equal to 8. So if the condition is false, what should happen? And so that's what the else comes in. So if true, execute this code, and if false, then execute the code under the else statement, right? So that's what we're going to do. So I'll just copy this, right? So we're going to be using the same code. So we're going to incorporate the else into this code that we've written. Now what is left is the else, right? So we just have to write the else here. Else, what should happen? Else we want, and you can use any representation that you are kind of comfortable with. It really doesn't matter in C++, so you can have a whole lot of style that you want to write your code in, right? So I'll choose to put my else here. Else you should output a is greater than 8 by, so if the number is greater than a minus 8 units, and then we go ahead and let's include an end line in case we want to print another line, right? So if the condition is false, then this entire code will run, right? So let's run this to see what the output is going to be. Now we have 9 is greater than 8 by 1 unit. Whoops. We could have used other conditionals to check if it's 1 unit and all of that, but it's kind of way too deep right now. So let's just stick to the basics. So what this code does is it checks the condition 9 is less than or equal to 8, and that condition was false. So since it was false, it did not run this following code under the if. It skipped to the else, and then it ran this block of code. And if the statement were true, it wouldn't have come to the else. It would just stop over there, right? So that's basically the if and the else conditionals and what you can do with them, right? So you can go ahead and output a second message here saying see out whatever you want. Let's say um just to make a or to make the condition true, to make the condition true, let me just subtract a minus 8 from, this should be from a, let's just include end line here. So right, so what I just wrote is to make the condition true, subtract a minus 8 to give us whatever units that the number is more than the 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 condition over here, right? So that will give us that, and then from the numbers, let's run this. You kind of get what I mean, right? So we run this and the condition was false. So what it did was it printed out 9 is greater than 8 by 1 unit, and then it wrote out the second one to make the condition true, subtract 1 from 9. So this a minus 8, a was 9, so 9 minus 8 is 1, so subtract 1 from a, which was 9. So basically that's what it does over here, right? So I hope you get the if and the else right now. So I'll go ahead and comment. I don't know what is in the next section. The next section is else if, right? So we'll be using, let me just comment this out because we'll not be using it again. So I come over here, then the next thing we'll be looking at is else if, right? So in a typical code, you might want to check several conditions to make sure that the code runs in a desirable manner. So right now we'll be using the else if in addition to the if and else, right? So the if and else are the beginning and ending of the conditions respectively, and then the else if are in the middle to check excess conditions that you want. So with an example, we'll kind of look at how we can use it. So let's say that we have an integer a, right, and it's equal to, let's say, 7 or anything, right? So what we want to do is we want to check if this integer is positive or negative. So how do we go about it? So we use the if, and then we have a conditional. So we want to check if a is greater than 0. So if a is greater than 0, then what we want to do is we want to print out that the number is positive since it's greater than 0. So this is the statement we are putting out. So a is positive. Let's just say it's positive, right? And we go ahead and then use the end line over here, right? So what this line of code does is it just prints out a is positive if a is greater than 0, right? So after this line, we want to say else what should the computer output? It should output a is negative. So we run this until we had 7, and we know 7 is greater than 0, and so 7 is positive over here. We go ahead to change it to -7, or you can just put any negative number and run it. -7 is negative. Okay, now what if a is equal to 0, right? So we run this and we have 0 is negative, right? But we did not exactly put any condition to check if they are equal. We only checked if it's more or if it's less. But then the computer made it that if it's equal, then it printed out the else since this condition was false. So since a is not greater than 0, so anything else apart from that would output this message. Anything else apart from this condition. So if a is not greater than 0, which that means that over here a was equal to 0. So anything apart from this should be this. That's what the else means, right? But that's not what we want to do. We want to say else if. So else if this condition is not true, then you should check if a is equal to 0. So if a is equal to 0, then you should output a is, sorry, if a is less than 0 rather. So if a is less than 0, so the first one checks to see if it's greater than, then the second one checks else if a is less than 0, then a is negative. If you've checked that and it's still false, then anything else, then see out that a is equal to 0. Right, so basically we've checked all the conditions that, or all the possibilities that might result. Right, so for this line of code we can then, for this block of code, we can check for positive numbers, for negative numbers, and for if it's equal to 0 as well. Right, so let's go ahead and substitute various values to see if any of the lines of code have any errors. So we run this and we have 0 is equal to 0, right? So that was when a is equal to 0. So what if a is equal to negative? Let's change a to a double so that we can use decimals as well. So what if a is equal to negative 8.9 or anything like that? We run this and we have negative 8.9 is negative. We can have a positive number like this, and we have 9,345 is positive, right? So all the blocks, all the lines, or all the conditionals were working perfectly, right? Now, since C++ does not really care about indentation, you can have these lines this way. But it's really nice and readable if you have it indented and neatly arranged, because this way kind of appears so clogged, even though it will still work, but it is not readable, right? So it's always good practice to write them separately and indented, right? So that's it for the else if statements. So we move on to the next section.